Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Jeremy Benamy, president of J Street here in Washington, D.C., and I am really thrilled and honored to be joined by my friend and sort of longtime toiler in the vineyards together, Sam Bahour. And I think that many of the folks in the J Street world know Sam, either from having met you in Palestine or having had you in their communities here or prior briefing. Sam is a Palestinian American, originally from Youngstown, Ohio. He's now based in Albireh, Ramallah. He's the managing partner of Applied Information Management, which is a consulting firm specializing in business development, focusing on startups in particular, and providing executive counsel. Many of you probably know Sam's writing, which has focused a lot on Palestinian economic development and what exactly it would take and does take to really jumpstart the potential, the enormous potential that exists in Palestine for the future and for economic development. I won't read Sam's whole bio. Those who are online, you can Google him and find out all the many wonderful details. But I do want to just say at the beginning, Sam, that I'm grateful on behalf of J Street for the cooperation that we've had over the years and working together for a vision that we share of a better future for your family, your children, my family, my children, and our people in this region. So it's a real pleasure. We are talking today, Sam, as the economic workshop, I guess, is probably underway now in Manama, Bahrain. And, you know, you've been very, very clear and outspoken in some of your views about the framework and the potential for this. And you, I think, called in your open letter to Jared Kushner, I think you called the whole enterprise essentially a snow job. And so I'm wondering if you could perhaps, as a way of opening the framing of this discussion, just give from your perspective as a very, very central player in the Palestinian economic sector, your perspective on this undertaking and why it is not the way for us to be going.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I guess I would start by saying there is nothing called economy alone. When we're in school, they teach it to us as political economy. It's one phrase, it goes together. The divorcing of the political part in terms of the entire process being announced in Bahrain today dismisses the core of this conflict. I guess I would say I have 5 things in mind to frame how my opinion towards this Bahrain conference works its way out. Number one, this is an ongoing process. This Bahrain economic workshop, whatever they call it, is part of a clear Trump strategy that has been going on now for a year and a half. And I won't rattle off all the things that they've done because I think we know them. But there's a clear adoption by the Trump administration to play the implementer of a right-wing Israeli extremist political program, one that Netanyahu leads. And now it even becomes even more dangerous given Netanyahu could not create a government and may end up in jail. We don't know what extreme he will go to stay out of jail. So this is the first one. It's an ongoing process, and we view it within that kind of context. The second is it misses the historical context altogether. We've been here. We've done this. We've had economy before politics. It was called the Oslo Peace Accords, and we did it for 25 years, only to bring us to where we are today. So it's not that we are dismissing the ability to discuss economy. The economy is important. We want to discuss it, but we learned our lesson. If there are not political parameters, if there are not borders, if there are not 2 states, there can't be a discussion about the economy. And believe me, we tried. And then the plan misses the stakeholders. I mean, you need the Palestinian political agency on the table. Yes, they found a few Uncle Toms. You know, we have our quislings like any other people in the world, but I'm not sure those quislings can actually absorb $50 billion. So I'm not exactly sure who they're talking to in Bahrain. Secondly, the Israeli political agency, the agency itself, the political agency needs to be on the table. They are the entity today which is calling the shots on the ground as a military occupier. Dismissing them from the entire project doesn't make sense. Yes, you can find a couple business people from any country in the world to attend, but we're talking about a political conflict that needs a political agency approach for both sides. So this is kind of like a political wedding or a wedding or planning a divorce, and the bride, the groom, and there's no clergy person there telling us what the rules are. So it's a total mess, in my opinion. Embarrassingly, the report that we read, the economic plan, misses and omits the elephant in the room. 52 years of military occupation are pretended like they don't exist. And then I guess I would lastly say that no state means no deal. And that's a Palestinian self-determination item. The Palestinians, up until today, and I'm glad they did, define their self-determination through statehood. The day, and this is an op-ed that I had today, just about an hour ago in the foreword, the day the Palestinians lose total hope and drop their bid for statehood, then this is going to be converted into a civil rights struggle. And that's, as good as civil rights may be in our context, that's an ingredient for a never-ending conflict. So in a frame, those are the things that we see wrong, not only with the economic workshop, but the entire process that's being applied, the workshop being one step in that process.
So first of all, I just want to say to all of those who are watching, I know we've got a couple hundred people who are signed in. We definitely want to include you in the conversation, and I want to encourage folks to, if you're on Facebook, feel free to drop a question or a comment into the chat there. Same thing on the Zoom. We'll be moderating that. I'll be getting the questions, so please feel free to throw questions our way so that we can make this a conversation. We have been very, very negative, of course, on this from the beginning. Whenever the words peace plan were uttered, I would always say, you can't call it a peace plan, it's a peace sham, right? It is not a plan for actually making peace between the people, so don't use the term peace plan. And there are people, even I'm sure among the couple hundred folks who are signed in now from the J Street world, who get very mad at me and they say, you know, you're just so negative and there's no hope of reaching a diplomatic agreement right now. So why not try to do a few things to make the situation a little bit better and to try to help create some jobs and some economic growth? And so why do you have to be so negative? And the question, I guess I'll deflect the question away from me and I'll ask it of you. In a sense, isn't there some stuff that could be done even without dealing with statehood and occupation? Are there some steps that could be potentially at least ameliorative in the short term?
No, I think. Our economy has been raped for 52 years and continues to be so. And it's as if all of a sudden this new player, or three new players, if we take David Friedman, Greenblatt, and Kushner, come to the door and knock on the door and say, hey guys, why don't we go out for a pizza and just have a conversation? That doesn't work. There is a crime being committed on the ground in Palestine, and we're not interested to go and have a chat about the crime. We need to be able to end the crime, and that means ending the occupation. When people say go and have a conversation, I mean, Greenblatt is becoming a professional and making it sound as if we don't even want to talk. I'm someone who 6 months ago wrote, actually I was speaking to a group of rabbinical students in Bethlehem. They were here on an encounter trip. And I was deep into my talk and I said, there's 101 things the Israelis can do tomorrow morning to make things a little bit more calmer here. Not end the occupation, to make them a little calmer. One of the rabbis raised his hand in the back of the room and said, Mr. Bahour, where can we find that list? And I was like, darn, now I got to go write it. And I went and wrote it. I'm one person. I was able to come up with 101 real live restrictions that are applied to us. I called the article The Mockery of Security. So there are things on the ground. All of those 101, I'm sure there's more, are completely missing from the agenda, from the economic plan, as if they don't exist. And that's the issue, because we'll get to it later here, but the projects that are being proposed are things we know. We've been working on them for the last 25 years. The question is, why haven't they worked? And I think there's enough evidence to show why they have not worked. And it's that elephant in the room, which is not even being seen by the Israeli side, well, by the US side, which is we need to talk to Israel about getting its boot of occupation off of our neck. Those projects are great as a standalone line item. And we know them, we worked on them, we know the restrictions. Kerry worked on them, Obama worked on them, they brought in McKinsey and Company to work on them. All of these players have all stated, for the mass majority of reasons why these projects have not come to life, it's because of the Israeli restrictions on the ground. And we're not hearing anything from the US side talking about the restrictions, just the opposite.
Right, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It just sounds much better coming from you than from me. You're there and you're living it. But you know, that's certainly the perspective that J Street has on the whole enterprise. I do want to pick up on one thing you said, which is that what's so fascinating is this document, which I think has 176 different projects and ideas in it, and is 40 pages long. There's nothing in there that hasn't been proposed before. In fact, a lot of it is sort of a laundry list that was produced by USAID by the very programs that the Trump administration has now shut down and fired all the people. And is there anything at all that you've seen in the document actually that is new? Is there an idea in there? Is there a project that we haven't seen before, or is it really all recycled material from other enterprises?
The mass majority that I can see are things which, as you say, we've hashed out before, we've seen, we worked on. And the interesting thing, the ironic thing, the absurd thing, is that the pictures, which are beautiful in the report, are from USAID projects that the Trump administration has cut funding from. But these are projects that have been going on for several years. So they're bringing people with smiles on their face that today don't have a job or are not a beneficiary to these projects because of Trump's moves. You know, the one project I saw that was different was to bring a foreign university, I'm assuming a US university, to Palestine. And because I actually had a university project in mind that I worked for 3 years, and I was a board member of a Beer State University. I laughed at that when I saw it. The issue is not another university. We have too many universities because the fragmentation on the ground has forced our communities to build more universities to be closer to the students. The other thing here, I mean, they talk about in education sphere, they say we're going to bring foreign teaching staff. That sounds great, especially for a closed economy like ours. Bringing foreign teachers brings a lot of new values and new thinking. They're not aware that there's a case right now going to the Israeli High Court because Israel has revoked the visas of about a dozen professors at Palestinian universities, foreign teaching staff. Mid-semester, they didn't renew their visas. So the universities now are without teaching staff because of that. And then Trump comes and says, here, you know, we really should bring some foreign teaching staff. You can see how that feels to people like me who are on the receiving end of not even being able to keep the few foreign teaching staff that we already have in the country.
So I'm going to just take a step back, Sam. I know that there's
Sure.
a couple of folks who have emailed in that they'd like to just get a quick 101 on exactly what's going on. I know some folks have signed in who may not follow this as closely as you and I do day in and day out. So today in Manama, Bahrain, a 12 to 15 nation workshop has been convened by Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, and David Friedman, the president's team that works on issues related to Israel and Palestine. And that economic workshop has been touted as a first phase of a quote unquote plan, the president's deal of the century or plan, ultimate deal to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this economic workshop is a first stage that is supposed to be followed by a political program that is now delayed at least until November. It's been delayed for a couple of years now already. Always there's something, election here, election there, holidays, this, that, the other thing. There's always a reason not to put this out. But this workshop is intended to put on the table a $50 billion 10-year plan. And the idea, I guess, and maybe you can illuminate a little for folks, is that this is supposed to attract foreign investment, that this is going to attract either private or potentially sovereign wealth fund from the Gulf investment. Maybe it's supposed to have European involvement. But the idea is that these projects and programs that have been outlined by the administration would attract the funding from other sources and jumpstart the economy and begin to give Palestinians some vision and future. So that, just by way of background, I know that there were some folks who want to know exactly what's going on, but it leads me to a next question, which is, we have seen this opera before, right? I mean, we have seen conferences, we've seen gatherings of donor nations, we've seen promises and pledges of billions of dollars have happened in the past. And so maybe, Sam, if in order to just help give people a little context here, what is the track record of these kinds of conferences and the follow through of the commitments that are made in the billions of dollars from other countries and from private sector sources?
Sure. I should also note the two parties that are not invited are Israel and Palestine.
Right.
And the parties that were invited and refused the invitation are China, Iraq, Lebanon, and Russia. China and Russia here being the important players. So this is definitely not international in terms of the players out there by any stretch of the imagination. Mainly these are Gulf states who are coming to this meeting. Many of them are forced to come. The history of these Gulf states are that they are equivalent to Central America's banana republics. I mean, maybe we can call ours petroleum puppets. They are very well polished in terms of being able to make grand pledges with great photo ops, but they rarely come through with the actual funds. And we saw that with Kerry's efforts in 2014, grand conference, big talk, a lot of pledges. We didn't see hardly any of that. And we saw it again after what happened in Gaza. There was a reconstruction conference for Gaza and Egypt. Same thing, same players, same people we know in the region come and say, yes, we'll rebuild Gaza after Israel destroyed a big part of it. And the photo op finishes and we're left empty-handed. These are states which are unrepresentative of their people. They are undemocratic. They're actually police states. And they are totally under the influence of U.S. administration. That's the Gulf. And when I say administration, not only the Trump administration, this is a long-standing kind of relationship between Gulf states and the U.S. The prospects here for these states actually helping, if they wanted to, they could. They could less today because the entire petroleum industry today is changing with solar energy and so forth. But they are very, very wealthy countries, and if they wanted to help, they could. But there's something here which is important, I think, that we have to keep in mind. And a lot of people ask me all the time when I give talks, aren't these your Arab brethren? Why aren't they coming forward to help? And that's kind of like a naive question to me. I'm from Youngstown, Ohio. Columbus didn't come and help Youngstown when we collapsed, right? It's similar to how Jews of the world, I think, don't accept what's being done in their name in this military occupation. Having the desire to see something end is very different than mobilizing and organizing to actually end it. And that applies to Palestinians and Arabs as well. I mean, I would love for the Palestinians all around the world to mobilize better, but their desire and their organizing skills are two different things. But these states specifically do have the resources, and that's what the missed opportunity is here. A different U.S. administration with a different approach not only could have had both the Palestinians and the Israelis on the table, they could have mobilized real funds that could have had a chance to succeed, because the Israeli side would have started to dismantle the occupation piece by piece. And what would fill that are funds and private sector development and better governance. But without that, you have a military occupation, and you're telling Palestinians that are living with a boot on their neck, have elections, have better governance, breathe a little better. There's no common sense in this relationship. It's going to be a missed opportunity of the century, not a deal of the century.
One of the things that you wrote, this open letter to Jared Kushner, which I highly recommend to folks. I think it's on Medium. I'm not positive. Maybe we can put the link into the chat so people can read it. But one of the things that is so fascinating and disturbing about this whole document is that it keeps on referring to things that institution building and making the Palestinian infrastructure work better, but the question of sovereignty and the question of whose infrastructure and who's at the crossings and who's the customs person and who collects the customs. You listed out a number of these sort of questions. Perhaps you could just articulate a few of them for folks to,
Sure.
begins to sink in how absurd this is when you get to the level of detail.
Sure. I mean, in a way, after seeing the last year and a half and then seeing the document for the first time to actually read something, I didn't know to laugh or cry. So I decided to write a satire in terms of a letter, an open letter. One of the things in the document says, this is a plan that can't work unless there's a peace plan. Isn't that what the Palestinians have been telling the Trump administration from day one? Show us the political parameters and then let's engage in the economy. They actually acknowledge that in the report. The report also says, or the plan also says, it's peppered throughout the report, that it can only be achieved, this economic plan, if there is an adoption from the applicable Palestinian authorities. But it doesn't mention that. It can't be the PLO because the US closed the office of the PLO and severed the communication channel with it. It can't be the Palestinian Authority. The US basically didn't invite them and just cut funding to them. So who exactly are they talking about? And when I read the following section, it says, we're going to give technical assistance to Palestinian immigration, not Palestinian, it says immigration officials and custom officials so they can do their jobs better. So I asked a question. That's a great, noble task. What's the flag that's going to be on their uniforms? From what country are these immigration officials? From what country are these customs officials? And then at the end of the report, it actually says, nothing here is original. We actually just did a desk research and put all of it together to present to you. I'm a consultant. I have a management consulting firm. If an employee brought me a report like that, they'd be fired. There's no field research. There's no analysis. There's no stakeholders. It's only a collection from the internet or wherever their sources are of all the stuff that has been tried, put in a flashy real estate development brochure. It's a farce. That's why I called it a snow job.
So let's follow. I guess the question on the chat here is somebody who's watching us now watched the opening session of the Bahrain Workshop, and their impression, they said it feels like a strategy for regime change through economic pressure. And I think one of the sort of fallacies or illusions that Kushner and Greenblatt and Friedman have had is that somehow you dangle the carrot of this massive investment and sums of money and projects, and somehow the Palestinian people will rise up against an authority that is standing in the way of this. So I'd love your take on that, and
Sure.
what is the reaction on the street and from the business community that you're affiliated with?
Sure. Actually, this is a very, very important point. In the op-ed that I have in the forward today, I actually mentioned this because I too read the entire process, not only the economic workshop, but the entire process that's going on for the last year and a half as a regime change, but with a different kind of style. There's no F-16s here. There's no CIA overturning institutions. It's much more fanfare oriented, but with a strategy. There is a strategy here. And the sad part is, I mean, Jason Greenblatt, the special advisor, had an op-ed in CNN a couple of days back, last week. And I was shocked at the level of discussion. He picked one Palestinian official, Saab Erekat, the chief negotiator for the Palestinian side, and spent about 3/4 of his op-ed just smearing this person. And I wrote in my op-ed today that that's pretty unfortunate. I've never been a fan of this leadership, nor the previous one. But today, I would say the mass majority of Palestinians, definitely the private sector, today, we are all Saab Erekat. They basically gave us a platform to unify around. And instead of being able to unify for better governance and unify for a better Palestinian strategy, what they gave us the rallying call to unify around, sadly I say, is for the existing leadership to recycle itself based on these US blunders. So the more the US fumbles in its approach to this peace process, the more it gives the Palestinian leadership currently, which needs serious reform, the ability to become very patriotic and very connected to the people, to the point where people link to them, giving them even more breathing room. We were very close to having elections this year. In January, we got President Abbas to actually publicly say that elections will take place in 6 months. Thank you, Mr. Trump. Because of this process you've created, those have all been now kicked down the road. So all the work that we secular Palestinians on the ground who have been working very hard day in and day out to create a better governing system here has been pushed down the road, because this is not the time to do that when we're under such serious pressure from the US side, both financially and from the Israeli side physically on the ground. The average people here, I mean, I thought of this question a little bit because there's different approaches. I would say the general reaction, I'll tell you this, my open letter to Kushner, I had it translated to Arabic yesterday, and I was going through the translation with a 23-year-old Palestinian woman from a village outside of Ramallah. And she's a sharp translator. And we finished the translation, and at the end I talked about 52 years of an Israeli occupation. And she looks up and she said, "Why do you keep calling it 52 years? Shouldn't you be calling it 71? Talking about when Israel was created. That is language that for the last 20 years has faded from our discourse. It's coming back in full focus right now because people are losing any kind of hope that this occupation can end. So we had a good conversation about that. The political class, they finally learned how to say, we're not playing this game anymore. You can't embarrass us to go have a discussion in the middle of a rape. So I'm glad the political class said no, but they also are using this as an opportunity to recycle themselves, and that slows down the process of better Palestinian political governance. The business class is interesting. The business class is organized in a coordinating body. They issued the first statement against the economic workshop before actually the Palestinian Authority itself issued a statement, which is rather interesting. So they know this game. They have skin in the game. They are losing money because of the occupation. They're not about to hear someone tell them, let's rally more money to throw into the reality here. But just a footnote here, the $50 billion that we keep repeating, that's actually for 4 or 5 countries. The amount going in the plan to the Palestinians is, I think, 27 billion. Half of that is grants and half of it is loans. So they're going to indebt us using other people's money, pretending like they're doing a structural adjustment where occupation no longer exists. And the Palestinian public, I guess, and my daughters I can place in this category too, one an MIT graduate and one a sophomore at Harvard, they basically came around the last couple of years to say, we understand that we recognize Israel, we have to move forward with a two-state solution, even though if it's not the most just or the most ideal, that's the right thing to do. This younger generation today is basically moving backwards, like that young translator. They're basically saying, you know what? Maybe the time has come that we deal with Israel differently as a generation. Maybe we look Israel in the eye and say, Israel, congratulations, you won. You get it all. You get Israel, you get the West Bank, you get West Jerusalem, you get East Jerusalem, you get all the water, the airwaves, the settlement, the frequencies. Gaza will throw in for free. And you know what else you get? Us. Now, we heard you have free health care in Israel. Where do we pick up our medical cards? If Ambassador Friedman, as he told the New York Times, that he doesn't know what a state is, which is shocking for an ambassador, and if this plan doesn't recognize statehood for Palestinians, they are pushing the entire Palestinian society to go to the only place that they can go, the organic, natural, default position of a civil rights struggle. And if that happens, sitting Israeli prime ministers and sitting Israeli defense ministers have stated in public, if the Palestinians make that shift away from statehood, the game is over. It may take 100 years of an anti-apartheid struggle. I'm trying to convince this younger generation, don't go that way. I know what civil rights are. I know what anti-apartheid is, but we are close to statehood. The US is on the wrong side of history. The mass majority of countries of the world have already recognized Palestine. The peoples of the world are behind the Palestinian movement. And I would assume that if you asked a Black South African 2 years before the end of apartheid, and you told him it's going to end, he would have told you you're nuts. Or if you told somebody in Germany that the wall was going to come down a year before it came down, they might have put you in a hospital. These things have a way of ending, but they don't end by themselves. They end by the work J Street and so many other organizations around the world are doing to actually bring senses to our politicians, because our politicians are not leading. They will follow, and we are the people they're following. So the better we organize, the more we have people coming forward. And we can see that in the Democratic Party in the US. It's moving. It's not moving by itself. It's moving because all the work that's happening on the ground. Sorry for the long answer.
No, I mean, I think it's exactly right. I think a lot of folks who watch this issue from the States may not really have the full feeling that you're providing of the mood on the ground. And, I think it is so obvious I spend a lot of time, obviously, on the West Bank, and I talk to a lot of young Palestinians, and I think it is really obvious how the shift is happening in the next generation away from a two-state framework and a sort of side-by-side, and how do we figure this out, to a civil rights one-state framework. And I may be, just stuck with you in the prior generation, really believing that ultimately that's a formula for ongoing violence and civil war, and it's not the route to freedom. But it's a new generation, and it's a new view, and I think it's really important for Americans to hear that over and over again. There was a question in the chat. Isn't there a case? And I know so many reasonable people in J Street. This is exactly what they keep pushing me on. But why not just go to the conference and have Palestinian leaders make the case there for the right to a Palestinian state, and use that platform to make these points instead of standing back and not participating. And I know it comes from a place of good intention, that so many of the people that I know in J Street would like to see Palestinians at the table making their case rather than refusing to go. Do you think there is any case to be made for going to a conference like this to make your political point rather than say no?
The mismanagement of the process on the American side kind of reveals the answer by itself. If this was really the first step that Trump took, I want to hold an economic conference. Of course, we need to see the parameters of law, statehood. That's what we've been working on. That's what Palestinians have defined as their self-determination. He could have said 2 or 3 sentences as a first step. I bet you we would have been there. He didn't do that, though. This is step number 10. All the steps prior are trying to damage and restructure how we define our self-determination. So this is not an innocent, let's go have a discussion. And I would tell that person asking, I would say, you know what, if those couple guys in Montgomery, Alabama just wouldn't have entered the cafe, wouldn't things been so much less violent, so much more cordial? There are moments in politics that you have to take a position. We Americans know that very well. And we should apply the same kind of logic when it comes to the Palestinians. We should be telling, as Americans, we should be telling the Palestinians, please don't go. For 25 years, they dragged you Palestinians through a process just to increase settlements and to make things worse on the ground. If you go, you're going to be the fig leaf for maybe another 10 years. So we should all be happy that the Palestinians are saying, let's get this over with now, because the more we prolong this, the more we're going to enter into a one-state reality. I don't call it a solution, which is going to be a difficult reality, or what I'm really fearful of in the days to come, we're going to enter into another cycle of violence. So the Palestinians are doing the world a favor by saying the buck stops with us. Why? Because this is about us. The United Nations defined development as a human right. It is our right to develop our own future. Nobody, US or other, has the right to develop and plan for Palestinians. So this is completely off balance from common sense, let alone any kind of legality. And worse yet, any kind of potential for success. A small consulting fee, I could have did a much better job for them and had everybody at the table.
So I'm going to shift then. We spent the first 33, 34 minutes of our conversation pretty much solidly trashing what they've done so far. So that feels like we've got that under our belt. So let's actually put on the consulting hat, and I'm going to ask you to do this pro bono. But sorry about that. But, you know, looking ahead, and I tend to spend a lot of time trying to refocus people to look ahead rather than all the things that have been going wrong and are going wrong. But, you know, let's, in the optimism view of things, imagine that in 2021 and 2022, we are in a different political environment in the United States, and you actually have a different administration and a different view on this that is actually trying to move the ball in the right direction. What, as the strategic consultant to the new team at the White House, in your memo that you're going to write in December of 2020, what is the right first step? What's the way to come out of the box with a different approach, given all the things that have gone wrong in this 4-year period now? How do you recoup the ability to actually do something positive, and where do you start?
I'm glad you asked this, because I've actually made it a point to end my talks as well that I give with this positive note. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't optimistic that this is going to end sooner rather than later, hopefully sooner. The first thing I would tell a new administration is recognize the state of Palestine. You recognized Israel 11 minutes after it was created in 1948. It's time to recognize the second state in the two-state solution that the US sold to us, basically, and we bought. So without now in this late in the game, without recognizing Palestine like most of the world has done, you are leaving the door open for two things. For Israel to continue to encroach and annex and build more settlements. National Security Advisor Bolton was in the Jordan Valley yesterday and made a grand statement that, oh, this is so important, Israel has to keep it. That's not the right approach. So recognizing Palestine, make sure Israel knows that there is an end game here. It's called a Palestinian state. And it also gives a message to the Palestinian side that when you recognize Israel formally at the beginning of the Oslo process, that's a political capital that you spent. And it's something that you have to embed within your political discourse, that Israel's not going anywhere. Recognizing Palestine gives both communities parameters to work in. Secondly, we need to remove the financial incentive that Israel has to keep this military occupation ongoing. And that's a blind spot. I think a lot of people think only about the politics here. I wrote an article a couple of days ago about how much Israel is addicted to our economy. They're addicted to our land for settlements. They're addicted to our water. They pump our water out from inside the settlements. They are addicted to our airwaves. Embarrassing. We got 3G on our phones last year after a 12-year battle with Israel to try to remove their hand off of our 3G frequency, the airwave above our head. Whole world got involved in it. 12 years to get 3G frequencies. You can imagine how we feel when the world is now at 5G. They are addicted to our queries, our minds. The largest economic sector in Palestine is stone and marble. We have some of the best stone and marble. We compete globally with it. Most of the mines are in Area C, which is 62% of the West Bank that Israel is in full control of. Israel issues permits to Israeli companies to come from Tel Aviv to mine and physically take the land, physically take blocks of land and go sell it on the global market. An Israeli human rights organization took that case to the Israeli High Court, their Supreme Court. And it was shocking about 5-6 years ago, the ruling of the Israeli High Court. They said the Israeli authorities in the West Bank have the right to allow that to happen. That was shocking. The highest judicial system, the judicial branch of government basically said there is no occupation, there's never going to be a Palestinian state, and we can actually physically take the land. So one last example, and this is an important one, it's actually within the plan that Kushner put out as well. Israel has become addicted to the natural gas wells that were found in 1999 in the Sea of Gaza. The Palestinians knew that we couldn't negotiate by ourselves with Israel, so we partnered with British Gas. And for 15 years, British Gas tried to convince the Israelis to allow us to tap our own natural gas so we wouldn't need US taxpayer dollars. And they, up until today, are refusing to get their hand off of the natural gas, just the opposite. They're cross-drilling, taking the gas as everybody's talking about it in Bahrain. So this financial interest to keep the occupation going has to be addressed in many different shapes, ways, and forms. And I guess the last is If we're serious about two states, I speak of us who are within the two-state domain, then we're not the only two states in the world which are adjacent. There are international norms and conventions and treaties which regulate how states which are next to each other operate, whether it's frequencies or water or otherwise. Let's start taking those conventions and, where possible, applying it to Palestine, Israel. Maybe that'll get off the negotiating table a lot of issues that don't have to be there, so we can, on the negotiating table, really focus on the stuff that requires negotiation. Us having access to our water should not be on the negotiating table. Us having access to our frequencies should not be something we would have to negotiate. So there's international rules and regulations. Let's start applying them, at least to the economic side of things, so the political stuff can be dealt with politically and not bluffed into some kind of economic discussion like what's happening now, dismissing the political part as something secondary. Last thing, they're saying they're going to announce the political part later. I think this is a bluff. I think the political part is exactly what they implemented from day one of the Trump administration up until now. So they've implemented a part without announcing it, and they're doing this economic move now. I don't think there's going to be a political part. I don't think they're going to have time. I hope he gets impeached tomorrow and then this all ends. But I think it's a bluff to get people just to buy into all of this. But if you look at the 10 steps or so that have been taken already, they are all very political. And that's why we're not going to Bahrain. The political part has been implemented and imposed already.
I think also one thing I would just comment on the likelihood of a document of some kind being put forward in prior administrations. Take Bill Clinton in 2000 with his parameters, or John Kerry in 2016 with his speech in late December. What prior administrations have done at the very end is they've put down a marker, sort of leaving behind their position on the key issues. I actually do think that the Trump administration will do that. I don't think they're going to do it as a plan, but I think that they will lay down markers that try to shift the goalposts as to what the discussions in future years will be. I think that that's part of the strategy and the agenda of David Friedman and his team is to shift the framework.
I think you're very accurate in saying they're going to try, but they will fail. Obama's administration was much more smarter. They didn't veto the last UN resolution, Resolution 2334, which basically says the settlements are wrong and countries need to differentiate their relationships with Israel. You can have relations with Israel, but not with Israeli companies and so forth in the occupied territory. The Obama administration allowed a Security Council resolution to pass by abstaining. The Trump administration has caused so much damage around the world, they will never, ever be able to get a consensus to pass a Security Council resolution. So the most they're going to be able to do is to issue a Balfour Declaration style proclamation. I call it the Trump's Donald Duck proclamation, and he'll show the cameras, and then it will be on the dustbin of history forever. So the Obama administration did something legal in setting a milestone. Right. And this administration or the next one should actually build on that, and that would be recognizing the state of Palestine. So at least in the codification part of things, you have two states. Then our kids can work on how to make that reality.
And I think for those who are listening, I think the issue of American recognition of Palestine is going to be more and more in the discussion. It has not been a political issue in this country, and it has not been on the radar for policymakers and politicians. It's just been beyond their concept, but I think more and more, we're certainly hearing it from activists in the region as a critical step, and I'm glad you're really harping on that point. I think we're going to hear about it more and more.
Jeremy, one point on this, Jeremy. The Palestinians had very little leverage with the U.S. before Trump. Very, very little leverage. We're a tiny country. The U.S. is a superpower. Trump gave us leverage. When they closed the PLO office, the Palestinian Official Representative Office in Washington, D.C., and kicked out our ambassador, the next administration is probably going to try to repair things. They're going to call the Palestinian president and say, you know, we had a problem with our past presidency, but now we want to correct things. Please come back and open up the PLO office in Washington. I assume the Palestinian leadership will reply, thank you, but no thank you. We are no longer interested in an office for the PLO. were interested for an embassy for the state of Palestine. That's leverage we didn't have. So there is a silver lining in this traveling circus of the century that they've created.
So I want to ask one final question, and maybe people have
Sure.
a final thing they're going to throw onto the chat. But I mentioned this to you as we were prepping for the call. There's recently been a new piece of legislation introduced in Congress that is called the Partnership for Peace Fund. It is a different take on how the United States could put some money on the table, as opposed to asking other people to put the money on the table, but put some actual money for economic development and also for people-to-people work, which I think is exceedingly important. And the U.S. has traditionally funded it until it was recently cut by the Trump administration. But the idea of this fund is $50 million a year that would be matched by Europeans at $50 million and other international players by another $50 million. So it would be $150 million a year. It has bipartisan support, which is a very rare thing these days in Washington, D.C. It has sponsorship both in the House and the Senate from Republicans and Democrats. And actually, J Street and AIPAC are both supporting the bill. So again, these are not your everyday occurrences, and a lot of credit goes to the Alliance for Middle East Peace for making that happen. I know there were some problems with the old draft of the bill in prior Congresses, and I'm just curious whether you have a perspective on whether or not with some of those problems addressed. I know you haven't read the new bill, but talking in a little bit more general context, is there value to the United States passing some sort of a new fund that does put some dollars on the table and says that there would be investment available?
I did read the original bill, the draft. I didn't see the new revised one. But in general, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I can say something similar to what I just said about the plan, Kushner's plan. The issue is not money. The issue is not money. And I assume here you have a forced relationship with Israeli component here. I mean, you're talking about $150 million. That's the value of one of our 6 investment companies here. One company here has that kind of investment already. We're talking about, I mean, I'm a board member of a bank here, the 3rd largest bank in Palestine. The banking sector in Palestine, which is very, very developed and part of the global banking network, has $13 billion of deposits in it. It lends out very little of that. Do you think because we don't want to make money by lending? I mean, that's how we make money as a bank. We don't for the same reasons we're telling Kushner. The market risks, because of the restrictions of the occupation, are too high. That's what we need to be talking about. It's not about putting more money on the table. I mean, I'm in the private sector. I mean, I wouldn't turn away money. We need it. Everybody needs to be funded to be able to operate. But the issue here, the priority is not the funding. If the boot of occupation got off of our neck, I mean, Bernard Avishai, an Israeli friend of mine from the German colony, he writes frequently as well. And he once told me, your economy is as if it's a spring, and there's something holding the spring down. As soon as that goes, you guys don't need all this assistance from everyone. You will have a flood of people coming forward to invest in the Holy Land. And this is something we have to keep in mind. We're not in need of funds being created for the sake of creating them before we're sure that the ecosystem here is investable. And that's what we need to work on. So I would just be cautious not to force feed a relationship between the Palestinians and the Israeli side in business, because there's a 10-meter cement wall between us and the Israeli side that Israel put up. So we can't today have a cup of coffee with an Israeli entrepreneur, let alone do business with them. But I'm sure there's creative ways that we can start talking the right language. And for US Congress to do anything positive, I think today should be headline news in the New York Times. But we have to be honest with ourselves as well, that money is not the priority. And that's Kushner's fault here as well, in terms of thinking that putting big numbers on the table, his are exaggerated to the point where they're no longer believable, that's going to make a change here. We need to get the restrictions off of our neck. And I'm saying that even if the occupation, I hope it doesn't, remains in place for another 5 years, those 5 years should not have an economic crisis if it was a lawful occupation. So I want to end the occupation. That's the ultimate goal. But in the meantime, let's have a lawful occupation So at least we can build an economy that's worthy of change. And I can almost guarantee you that the Palestinian private sector, which is actually networked around the world, will not have a problem to mobilize funds if the opportunity lends itself.
Right. Well, that is a really great note to end on, Sam. I would also just throw in one note of humor to end this on, which is I was just texted that in the Politico playbook this afternoon, the PM version, the correspondent for The Economist, Greg Carlstrom, who's at the conference in Bahrain, his quote is, "This is sort of like watching a newly minted McKinsey consultant who just spent a week in the occupied territories present his findings." So that says
a lot.
Yeah.
One tidbit yesterday I read in the Israeli press, a Jewish Israeli journalist from Channel 11, I think, was denied access to go to Bahrain. Yehadot Ahronot, which is an Israeli newspaper, reported that the U.S. vetoed her because she asked too many hard questions. If that's true, it tells you what we're talking about.
Unbelievable. All right. Well, Sam, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time. It's evening time, family time in your neck of the woods, and taking an hour out of your schedule is very gracious of you. And we all benefit from your insights and your clarity on all of this, and look forward to continuing to work with you, hopefully on a better future in the years to come.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sam. Take care.